So just a quick background, Casado is a Group 1 and Group 2 dual-mode wild oat graminicide for wheat. It's a breakthrough concept and formulation that showed excellent results in 2025, its introductory year. Because Casado will be the go-to choice for many farmers, we want to make sure we can give the most thoughtful agronomic advice for its use. To understand what environmental conditions could affect control of wild oats, and if there are options to mitigate them, we commissioned an extensive growth room study with Dave Greenshields of Insight Plant Health Corporation. A quick background on Casado. I believe most of you are likely familiar with it, but a quick background. Casado, again, was introduced last year. It's the first Group 1 and Group 2 formulated product for grassy weed control on the market. It's a full rate of pinoxidant herbicide at 100 grams per liter and a full rate of thiacarbazone active ingredient at 8 grams per liter. It's an oil dispersion formulation, so it has a little bit of seed oil, canola seed oil actually in the formulation that helps with uptake and penetration. It's registered for wheat and durum wheat, application from the 1 to 6 leaves on the main stem plus 3 tillers prior to jointing. Okay, and Melissa will talk more specifically about Casado as we get into it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Dave Greenshields. Dave is a licensed professional agrologist and holds a bachelor's degree in agriculture and a PhD in biology from the University of Saskatchewan. Dave has worked in ag research and business development for the past 20 years. He's the author of 16 peer-reviewed scientific publications and an inventor of 12 patents and applications. Dave started Insight Plant Health in 2020 to provide custom contract research and product development support for other agricultural businesses. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave, and I will remind everybody that this is being recorded for people that are attending, and we will have CEU credits available at the end of the webinar. Dave?
All right, thanks a lot, Rob. And thanks to ADAMA for the opportunity to present this work. So I'm going to talk today about a project that we did with ADAMA back last spring, looking at Casado and how it works under different weather conditions. So for the agenda, what I'll talk about today, I'll go through some introduction of Insight Plant Health, and then a little bit of background on the experiment, how we set up the experiment, so all the different variables that we used, what data we collected, and then I'll run through the results and talk about some conclusions at the end. So Insight Plant Health is a business-to-business agricultural service lab. I founded Insight in 2020, so we're just over 5 years old. We're based in Saskatoon, Canada. Most of the work we do is on biological products. We specialize in biological products, but we also look at, like today, what we're going to talk about, look at chemistry as well. And so we do a lot of kind of product testing, but also product development. So formulation development and product characterization and that sort of thing. Most of our customers come from the US and Canada, but we also have customers in Europe, India, South America now. So what we were trying to do in this experiment was to see how wild oat control was affected by different weather conditions. So whether it's going to be hot or cold when you spray, or whether it's wet or dry. And then we layered on top of that 5 different wild oat biotypes to see how the different weather conditions affected herbicide efficacy in different hard-to-kill populations. So if we go to the next slide. So the first part of the setup was the plants. So we tested 5 different wild oat biotypes. 4 of those had been supplied by ADAMA, and they showed variable herbicide responses in the 2024 field testing season. So a biotype is just a plant or a group of plants that behaves differently than the rest of the population. So there's something unique about it. So what was unique about the 4 biotypes that ADAMA collected is that they look different in field trials. for one reason or another. Then we had one biotype that was supplied by Jessica Enns at work, and it had no known herbicide resistance, so anything could kill it. So we took those, the seeds of those different biotypes, and we stratified them in the fridge for a week. So that, you'd think that a weed, and yeah, if you have wild oats, you'd think they just germinate kind of on command at any old time, but it's actually pretty hard to get them to germinate at the same time when you're running one of these trials. So you end up, if you don't put them in the fridge, then you end up with, one plant one week and another one the next week and so on and so forth. So this kind of evened out the germination. Once they were in the fridge for a week, then we put the seeds into 3.5-inch pots. We did 5 seeds per pot and 6 pots per treatment. So there were 30 plants per treatment is what we tested. And then the plants, when 75% of those plants were at the 2-leaf stage, that's when we sprayed them. So this is a picture of when they got sprayed at the top there. So the next layer on top of the plants was the weather. And this slide's kind of busy, but I'll try and walk through it. So we planted, if you look at the arrow at the top, we planted the plants there on the left-hand side. And then we waited until we grew them under what we were calling normal conditions until the 2-leaf stage. So normal conditions were 23 degrees during the day, 18 degrees at night, and watered to 80% field capacity. So, I mean, those aren't actually normal conditions for springtime in Saskatchewan, but they're conditions that wild oats, they were happy to grow at. So we did that until they were at the 2-leaf stage. And then we switched the temperature in the growth chamber. So we either switched it to hot, which was a 30-degree day and a 25-degree night, with 100%, or I'll go to the wet and dry after. So we either switched to hot, which was 30 degrees during the day and 25 at night, or we switched it to cold, which was 3 degrees all the time. So we did that 3 days before we started spraying. We also split the hot and cold treatments in half and watered half of them to 100% field capacity. And then the other half had no water a week prior to spraying. So they were completely dried out. If you think about a little 3.5-inch pot that you don't water for a week, yeah, they were parched. So then we did that for 3 days, and then we sprayed them. And then we kept those weather conditions going for another 3 days, and then we returned them back to normal. So it was mimicking, if you had kind of hard conditions when you were spraying and how that would affect the efficacy of the herbicides. Then we took measurements at 5 days, 12 days, and 18 days. We photographed all the plants, and then at 18 days, we harvested them. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the setup for the herbicides. So this is kind of the final layer on top. So all of the plants had one of these treatments. So the untreated control was just sprayed with water. Then we had pinoxidin and thiocarbazone methyl alone. And I will say that both of these were commercial products. We didn't just use the technical active, we just used a single action product off the shelf. And you'll see some of that with the efficacy in the pictures that I show. But so we tested pinoxidin, thiocarbazone methyl, and then we had thiocarbazone methyl with ammonium sulfate with AMS. And then we tested Cazado alone, Cazado with MSO, Cazado with MSS or AMS, and then Cazado with AMS and MSO together. So those were all the different herbicide treatments that we tested. And this is the spray chamber that we used for the testing. This obviously is wild oats, but it's just a picture of the chamber. And what it is it's a single nozzle mounted on a track, and then you can adjust the pressure and the speed at which it moves. And so you just go with a bucket and collect your spray over that area, and then you try to measure the amount of spray that it would take if you extrapolated it up to an acre. And so we were spraying at a 40 liter an acre rate. So then we were adjusting based on what we could collect in a graduated cylinder until we got to that rate. And I guess I should say before I go into the results, when I say we did, I really mean Cassidy McPherson and Tessa Lester did. I wrote the report and talked about it, but they actually did all of the work. So really, I should be thanking them off the top. So here's the data we collected. We photographed all of the plants at day 5, day 12, and day 18 after spraying. And then at 18 days after spraying, we harvested the above ground portions of the plants and measured the fresh weight. So we just took a scalpel, cut them right off at the soil surface, and then measured the fresh weights of each plant. We then dried the plants in an oven until the weight of the plants was stable over 2 consecutive days. So they stopped losing water. And then we recorded those dry weights. And then weed control was estimated based on the dry weights of the plant. So that's a pretty common way to estimate herbicide efficacy is by doing dry weights. You can take the dry weight of an untreated control versus the dry weight of your herbicide treatment, and then you get like a weed control efficiency number, a percentage number. So this is what the plants looked like at 5 days. At 5 days, there was no obvious herbicide effect in any of the treatments. This is just the normal biotype that didn't have any herbicide resistance or tolerance under the different weather conditions. And what you can see is that the normal plants grew well. The hot plants, whether it was hot, wet, or hot, dry, were pretty leggy and really tall. And then the cold plants, whether it was cold, wet, or cold, dry, were quite a bit shorter than the other ones. And then at 12 days after spraying, you could start to see the effects of the herbicides. So these pictures, this panel here, if you look at the top is the different herbicide treatments. So each column represents a single herbicide treatment. And then the rows represent the different weather conditions. And again, this is the same biotype that didn't have any known resistance. So what you can see is that under normal conditions, everything works, right? So you get, you're starting to see, stunting, yellowing, plants are starting to fall over in any of the treatments. When you start going down into the weather, the hot conditions, actually the hot and wet conditions, they look a little bit more affected than the normal conditions. Hot, dry, about the same. Under the cold conditions, the main difference you see is that, so the height that the plants were when they were sprayed, they didn't really grow much after that. So if you look at the untreated control on the left-hand side in either of the cold conditions, and then you look at the different herbicide treatments, you can see they're all quite short, and that's just kind of how they stayed. So if you switch up to the next one. So this is 18 days after spraying. And instead of showing the weather conditions, this is all normal weather. This is showing the different biotypes at 18 days with the different herbicide treatments. So each row represents a different biotype, and each column again represents the herbicide treatment. So if you look on the left-hand side, you can see the untreated control there. And that kind of gives you a look at how they all looked growing normally. And then if you go and look at the different ones, so say biotype 5 at the bottom is the biotype that had no known herbicide tolerance. And you compare that to biotype 2, for instance, a lot more green plants in biotype 2. So maybe there's some group 2 resistance there, it looks like. Thiene-carbazone methyl, you can see on its own had a tough time controlling any of the biotypes very well. But then when you added AMS to that, you saw it knock down quite a bit. If you look at the harder to kill biotypes, so biotype 2 or biotype 3 and even biotype 4, the addition of MSO or AMS to the Casado treatment makes a pretty big difference. And then if you go down to the end where it's Casado, AMS, and MSO, you kind of get the best control with the three altogether. So that just kind of points to the importance of adjuvants in improving the control. This is a graphical representation of that. So the axis on the left there, the vertical axis is dry weights per plant. And you can see, so the green bars, the ones that are the highest, are that biotype 2. Those ones, that were the hardest to control. And you can see the thiocarbazone methyl, even with AMS, had a tough time controlling that. If you look over towards Casado, you can see that the weights go down. So the shorter the bar, the better the control. And these are all the different biotypes together. You can see here panoxidin, the panoxidin product, I should say, because it's obviously not just the active here, because you're getting really good penetration and decent control as well. Worked on all the biotypes. And then if you maybe go to the next slide. Yeah, if you look at the Casado treatments, as you add in the adjuvants, you get better and better control. So, Casado did actually a pretty good job on biotype 2. But then as you added in AMS and MSO, you got stepwise reductions. So this is looking at, again, the normal biotype 18 days after spraying with different weather conditions. So this is showing the untreated control on the left-hand side, and then all the different herbicide treatments. And again, this is kind of similar to the 12 days after spraying, but the results are a little more pronounced. What you can see is that sorry, I just want to catch up on my notes here, turn in pages. So you can see under normal conditions, again, pretty decent control in most of the treatments. Thiocarbazone methyl had a bit of a problem, but I mean the Casado alone and then the Casado with the adjuvants worked really well. Under hot and wet conditions, they're again still decent control. And then if you look at the cold conditions, so cold and wet and cold and dry, the plants stayed greener. But if you look at the size of the plants, especially in the cold and wet, like these are still look like the 2-leaf plants that we initially sprayed 18 days earlier. So they didn't grow at all. Whereas if you look at the dry conditions, you can see that, the plants are all tipped over and they're looking rough, but they did actually grow quite a bit in the meantime. You can see here under the cold and wet conditions too, Casado and then the addition of the adjuvants looks like you're really thinning out the plants. So you're getting a lot more completely dead plants. They're all pretty stunted and rough looking, but they're yellowing and keeling over. So this graph is a combination of all of the biotypes. So we took the estimated marginal means of all the biotypes together and then looked at the herbicide effects under all the weather conditions. So if you look at the blue bars, so light blue is cold dry, dark blue is cold wet, the yellow bar is hot dry, orange bar is hot wet, and then green is normal. So if you combine all the biotypes together, what you can see is that the cold conditions actually the herbicide efficacy was pretty good in the under cold conditions. The bars dropped by quite a bit, similar with the normal. Where there was more of a problem was under the hot and dry conditions. So if you look at the untreated control on the left here compared to the thiocarbazone, you can see there's really not much of a drop. But then again, you look at the addition of the adjuvants, and that helps bring those bars down a bit. So what this is showing is that you're getting better control under the cool and normal conditions than you are under the hot and dry, or hot, dry or wet conditions. So this is if you flip. So instead of having a reduction in the bar, the height of the bar shows the percent reduction overall. So in this, you'd want higher bars. So this is just taking the herbicide treatment and then comparing it to the untreated control. And so if you're looking at the blue bars again are the cold, and the orange and yellow bars are the hot, and then the normal is the green. So this shows that the tough to control with the hot and dry, but then the addition of the adjuvants helps out a lot more under those conditions than it does under the cold conditions. Under the normal conditions, it's kind of splits the difference between the two, but it's showing that the adjuvants actually work better, under that stress condition. They add more than they do under normal conditions. So, to highlight some of the things that we saw in this study, whether wild oat biotype and herbicide treatment all had effects, significant effects on herbicide efficacy. So there were significant differences, on whether the herbicide, how well the herbicide worked based on the weather, based on what biotype you were treating, and then of course based on the herbicides. The wild oats themselves grew better under cool conditions than they did under hot conditions. So they had better biomass development under the cool conditions than they did. Moisture had less impact on the wild oat growth than temperature, but the dry conditions, dry hot, were harder to control than the dry cold conditions. And the moisture part here, if I was to repeat this whole experiment again, I think I might be a little more aggressive, maybe take the normal down to 60% field capacity for water, and then, really, really dry out, or keep the treatments for longer rather than 3 days around the spray window. I think you would have been able to see a, better, more differences anyway. The other takeaway on this was that the biotypes themselves vary in their weather preferences. So if you switch to the next slide, this is the dry weights again, and then each of these bars represents a biotype. So the biotypes are the numbers at the bottom, and then the different weather conditions is each bar. So what you can see is that this biotype number 2 prefers normal weather conditions by a long shot. So it almost doubles the size of the plants. Whereas if you look over at biotype number 4, under cold conditions, it grows a lot better than it does under hot or normal conditions. So it prefers cold conditions. And then, the one biotype with no known resistance is kind of flat across the board. So when you combine the weather preferences of the individual biotypes together with knowing that when it's a cold condition, you can kind of lock the wild oats down when you spray them. It kind of just points to what they always say. So spray as early as you can, because the earlier you can spray them, the smaller you're keeping the oats, and better your kill is. And that across all different biotypes. So under normal weather conditions, the wild oat biotype with no known herbicide resistance was controlled by everything. Panoxidin, thiocarbazone, methyl with and without adjuvants, or Casado with without adjuvants. They all worked. But Casado performed the best under the normal to cool growing conditions. So that's where it had the best effects. And I know I said this a million times, but AMS and MSO improved Casado performance. Together, they improved it more than each did alone. And they were most beneficial when there were stress conditions. So when the plants were under stressed conditions. So if you go on to the next one. Oh, that was my last one. So thank you very much. I just put my address up here. If you're ever in Saskatoon, by the jail is where we are up on Miller Avenue. Feel free to stop by and we'll give you a little tour.
Okay, thanks, Dave. That was great, very insightful. And once again, we appreciate your work. And as we dive more into new innovative herbicides like Casado, we will continue to do more lab and more detailed testing to continue to learn about best practices with products like Casado and others coming down our pipeline. So in my mind, to reiterate what I learned from your study is that wild oats grow best in cool conditions. We kind of knew that, but it was great to see that reinforced under good controlled conditions. Hot, dry conditions have the most impact on wild oat control and on herbicide performance. The herbicides tended to perform a little bit lower under the hot, dry conditions compared to when it was cooler or normal conditions. And with Casado specifically, adding AMS and MSO have benefit, particularly under stress conditions. Not so much needed when it's normal conditions, but under stress conditions, the addition of those adjuvants certainly help. And we found from our trials and field experience last year is that the addition of broadleaf herbicides like Forest Fighter, Esteem, etc., also have a positive impact with some of the built-in adjuvants with those broadleaf herbicides for providing some benefit to adding an adjuvant from the broadleaf herbicide as well. Next slide, Mel. So thanks again, Dave. With that, I will turn it over to Melissa to update our best practices with Casado.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Melissa Ostash. I'm the technical sales agronomist for Manitoba, and I will be just reviewing some slides on Casado, the best management practices, and even some grower feedback that we've been shared. So yeah, welcome to the next generation of wild oat control for wheat. So 3 things we know for sure. You will have wild oats in your wheat fields, and if you don't, you're very lucky, but guaranteed you all have wild oats present. You only get one pass to control them in crop, and this is usually a critical time to get that application made. So we want to do it in the best, most feasible way. And then also you want the biggest bang for your buck, right? So this is really where a product like Casado does come and shine. It's the first and only multimodal action graminicide on the market. Like Rob mentioned earlier, it features that panoxidin, thiocarbazone combination at both full rates. So again, we're not slashing rates or keeping the full just to help prevent the resistance opportunity to get enhanced by cutting those rates. It is a very user-friendly product. It was tested tested with over 22 broadleaf tank mix partners when we performed RAs with it a couple years ago, and guys just found it easy to use. It mixed well, and yeah, just an overall user-friendly product. So right now, Casado is a good option when it comes to controlling group 1 resistant and group 2 resistant biocides. It has proven efficacy on beating or matching the competitors 93% of the time in over 50 field scale grower trials that we've hosted and conducted. And again, it's conveniently packaged in either cases or drums so that you have that bulk option and are handling less jugs out in the field. And as I mentioned, it is easy to use and extremely tank mixed friendly. So this is again kind of why we highlight why Cazado matters no matter what biotype you have present. So with that group 1 and 2 active present, you have that multimode of action. And again, we see this in broadleaf products, right? We see multimode broadleaf products to combat resistance. And this is the direction that we went with Cazado. So with Cazado, you don't need to know the type of wild oats you have present. It takes the guessing out because if you have group 1 present, it'll work on those. And if you have group 2 present, it'll work on those as well. So here's just a really good image. And I wish we had actually, I don't know, I have my laser here, but this arrow here shows where it was sprayed and treated with Cazado. And as you can see, it did a really good job compared to the neighboring field where this was the mess of wild oats. So yeah, this was just from a grower feedback. These fields were right next to each other. Grower didn't know if he had resistance. At the end of the day, you can see clearly he definitely had some resistance present. When he used Cazado, it was much better efficacy than the single active competitor product he used on the other side. So this is really where I am going to highlight the best management practices when it comes to Cazado. And there are 5 general rules I would like you guys to follow and remember going forward. So first things first, we always want you to apply earlier. And this kind of lines up with even what Dave's saying, cooler conditions, right? So apply early, 2 to 4 leaf stage for those wild oats is optimal. We also want to make sure that you are using good water coverage. And I know lots of times guys want to, skip out on this, go down to 5 or 7.5. We do encourage 10. 10 is best. It guarantees good coverage. And also by adding that AMS to the tank, you're going to just see a little bit more enhancement to that group 2 thiocarbazone, which really does like that AMS additive to the tank. Number 3 is avoid stress conditions. So we've kind of been singing the rule of 3s. So if you avoid applying Cazado once temperatures reach 3 degrees or less, 3 days before or 3 days after. This way this allows the plants to recover. It'll make them fully susceptible to the herbicide versus still recovering, not functioning as normal due to those weather extremes. Another thing we want to just make sure is mix with a broadleaf tank mix partner. Again, sometimes that group 2 can work on some group or broadleaf weeds, but we want to make sure it's going down with a group or a broadleaf tank mix partner. And that's simply put is the phenoxys, as Rob kind of mentioned there too, can also enhance the activity of the actives. And lastly, again, use proactively to manage resistance. Cazado is not a silver bullet. If you have very high resistance to group 1 and 2 populations, so wild oats that are resistant to both in your fields, it's not going to be that silver bullet. This is a product that will help delay resistance for up to 5 years in fields that have either low to moderate resistance of group 1 and 2 wild oats present. So again, don't think of it as that silver bullet, one shot's going to fix all. Use it proactively as part of that integrated pest management plan. So diving forward as we look into spring wheat. So I'm going to specifically talk to spring wheat here. We are recommending using AMS with Cazado when used in spring wheat. And as you kind of seen from just the slides presented earlier, we are continuing to learn about this product. And as we continue to learn about it and study it, we are also recommending adding MSO. And MSO can be added when you are not tank mixing Cazado with broadleaf, but again, strongly encourage this in environmentally stressed conditions. So again, those hot, dry conditions really prove for AMS and MSO to be a better option for tank mixing or adding, I should say. And then if you have extremely high wild oat pressure, again, this is just going to help bring that active into the plant quicker. And especially if you have higher populations and coverage is, not the best situation there. And of course, if you have significant resistance. So this is an image that comes from the Swan River area. It's from a third-party field testing. And as you can see, again, this is from a field test that we have our untreated here. We have our simplicity application. And clearly there's group 2 resistance happening in this field. And then of course we have AMS and Casato, which you can see it knocked them down or knocked them back quite a bit. But once you added that AMS, Casato, and MSO, you get really good control of those wild oats. So really good to see this not only in a greenhouse, but also at that field scale level. And then when it comes to durum wheat, things change between spring wheat and durum wheat. And I want to really stress this. Do not use AMS with Casato when using on durum wheat. This could add to the potential of a crop response. We just know durum's a little bit more sensitive, so we just want to make sure that it's not going down with AMS in durum wheat. We do recommend adding a non-ionic instead. So if you are using Casato alone and not with a tank mix partner, with a non-ionic would be best here at 0.25% volume per volume. And again, no AMS just due to the potential risk of a crop response. So as highlighted, this kind of breaks down our learning curve for Casato. It got registered for control without additives. We understood that, hey, it has thiocarbazone. What if we added AMS in here? And we noticed that it sharpened that control in a lot of the cases there. And then as we continued to learn, it's like, okay, how can we improve it even more? We did add some MSO, and again, it just helped bring those actives into that wild oat leaf, and noticed, again, a better uptake and efficacy. And then, of course, when you add MSO and AMS, we noticed a more consistent and impactful wild oat control versus just individual components. Now, I will mention the MSO and AMS combination. Use your best judgment here, especially when you have actives that potentially have, or tank mix partners that have maybe the group 6 and 27s. Those are going to be a little bit hot, right? And you got to also think too, does it need that to even sharpen those? Because those are hotter actives. Will they help, bring those actives, even though it's a broadleaf, uptake and make it go into the plant a little bit better, right? So use your best judgment here, or even if it's really hot, dry conditions, we don't want to scorch that crop, right? So agronomics still apply. Use it case by case scenario, and just understand, though, at the end of the day, if you have ideal growing conditions, MSO and AMS will work really well with Casato. Now, the next slide is a little video that we just wanted to share with you guys. So I'm just going to go to that one. Please.
Nothing feels worse than seeing regreening and regrowth in a field after spraying. With Casato, we noticed that the wild oats stopped growing almost immediately, and within 2 weeks they were visibly dead. The wheat field we sprayed this season was the cleanest by far. For anyone looking for excellent control of wild oats in wheat, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Casato.
Yeah, so that kind of wraps up my portion of the presentation. Again, it's kind of sweet to wrap it up with a grower's perspective and review of the product and his experience with Casato. So with that, thanks again for your time, and I will pass it back to Rob.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Appreciate the update to our best management practices. And thanks again, Dave. Great information you shared with us. So with that, I'll turn to some of the questions that we had on the Q&A. If there's any more questions or comments, please feel free to add them to the Q&A, and we've got a few minutes here to try to address them. First question, slides for sharing. Yes, there'll be a link sent out to this webinar tomorrow, and it'll be updated on our YouTube channel. So you will be able to access the slides for reference and the recording beginning tomorrow. Okay, another question, what were the two groups in durum wheat that a little bit more cautious for tank mixing? That would be group 6, like bromoxynil, and the group 27s, like the Infinity type of products that are a little bit hotter on the crop. Even spray a group 27 by itself, you can see a crop response. So there's a bit more of a watch out with the group 27 and group 6, particularly in durum wheat. And that applies to most herbicides, tank mixes with those two groups.
Yeah, and we got to remember to just going back to that one, Rob, remember it's a non-ionic should go down with durum, not MSO and AMS.
Right. Good call, exactly. Another question regarding MSO and AMS. It was just asking about the impact in the lab and in the field. I think you showed a great anecdotal response from that Swan River area where adding both MSO and AMS helped on a highly resistant group 2 population. So we do have some good field knowledge to show that adding both the MSO and AMS can help under tougher conditions when you have high resistance, heavy population, stressed conditions. It's hard to quantify the increase. We've seen anywhere from like 5 to 20% increase by adding the two adjuvants together in the field, and some trials and in field conditions like we just saw in that picture. And in the lab, Dave shared quite intensively the differences there. It's probably a similar amount with 20% increase with a couple of those biotypes by adding MSO and AMS. Dr. Geddes made a comment about the wild oats, and yeah, I was surprised to see the differences in the growth of wild oat biotypes. I just assume that all wild oats kind of are one phenotype. They all kind of grow the same. They grow more in cool, wet conditions, less in hot, dry conditions, but there's obviously some differences in biotypes. That was another little interesting nuance that we learned from Dave's trials, that there are differences in biotypes, that even within the wild oat populations, it's not a static population, resistance aside. Different populations of wild oats have different growth patterns, and that could be an interesting another area for study. So no real insight into why, but that was a learning to me. And yeah, Dr. Geddes.
Yeah, I was wondering, Rob, where if you knew where they were each collected from, then you might be able to get to the question of whether is it a genetic component or is it some sort of imprinting like methylation, some sort of memory from the parents where they were growing, or interesting question. Yeah, it was like, because some of them, the same biotype had double the biomass when grown in a different weather condition, right? And so there is something there, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, good point. I assume it's a genetic difference within the wild oat population, but yeah, interesting. Is there a combination between environmental and genetic interaction that we're not really aware of? So interesting. I will comment to the biotypes. So we've tested well over 100 different biotypes in lab scenarios, just looking for levels of resistance and control levels with Casado versus other herbicides. And we specifically gave Dave a few of the more problematic ones that we had from field experience to see what the impact from weather or the hot, dry conditions would have on control. And overall, we got relatively good control in the different conditions, but we did see some differences from the environment that we saw. So they were a couple of biotypes there in particular that had relatively high group 2 resistance. So that leads to another question regarding group 1 and group 2 antagonism. So particularly group 2 causing group 1 antagonism. So we know that there is a level of antagonism from adding broadleaf herbicides to group 1s. Overall, the level of control in wild oats tends to be acceptable, even if we're seeing like a reduction of like 5% from adding tribenuron or something like that to a group 1. We do see a small level of antagonism from group 2 onto group 1s. And I would classify it or characterize it as similar with Casado. Thiocarbazone does have a broadleaf component to it, so we do see a slight reduction overall by a few percent on average. For the most part, we've seen that Casado does a great job of controlling group 1 or group 2 resistant populations. So the amount of reduction or antagonism overall is minimal, just like with a broadleaf herbicide being mixed with a panoxidin or another group 1 herbicide. As we've seen and continue to evaluate different biotypes, there are a few that are a little bit tougher than others. And overall, I'd characterize it that with group 1 resistant populations, Casado has done a great job. With most group 2 populations, it's resistant populations, it's done a very good job as well. If we've seen any problematic biotypes, it's been more on that high group 2 resistant biotypes, and we're still, trying to understand a little bit more why some biotypes are a little bit tougher to control than others. So, just saying group 2 antagonism is not exactly a blanket statement, because there does seem to be some variations within populations. So we're trying to delve into a little bit more about metabolic resistance or target site resistance, and if there's any differences or interactions there. But overall, we are seeing great control of Casado.
Yeah, and then Rob, there was another question about how much AMS is recommended. So if it's a 40, and it will vary, this varies based on the solution using, but if it's a 40%, it goes 0.5 liters per acre, or 20 acres per 10-liter jug is the most common rate, I believe, that's out there for AMS. And then also any water pH issues with Casado. So the AMS actually does perform as a water conditioner. So it does help alleviate that or relieve that. So really no major concerns when it comes to pH and Casado that we are aware of, or even from our internal studies as well.
Thanks, Mel. And a comment just to add to that, in our studies with AMS, yes, I agree that we should think of AMS in general as a water conditioner. That being said, we haven't really seen much of a negative impact from hard water on Casado performance. So with Casado, and potentially it's the same with thiocarbazone, it seems to be more of a adjuvant benefit effect as opposed to a water conditioning effect. Or hard water does not seem to have a big negative impact on Casado is what I'm trying to say. So the benefit we get from AMS seems to be from the adjuvant properties, the helping with penetration and spreading. Okay. Any other questions? I think we went through the list that I saw in the Q&A. Or okay, if not, well, thanks very much. If any last minute questions or comments, feel free to please put them in the chat. We've got a few minutes left if there's anything else that comes up. But beyond that concludes our first in a series here of innovation and education webinars. I will remind everybody that our next session is on February 6th at 9 a.m. Central Time, 8 o'clock in Alberta. And that'll be specific to better understanding of Black Lake and verticillium, with Ian Epp from Sask Oilseeds as our featured speaker for that webinar next Friday. Okay, and anybody that'd like to collect CA credits, from your app, if you can take a screenshot of this barcode, you'll automatically get the points. You won't have to sign in if you're able to screenshot that with your CCA app. Again, to Dave and Alyssa, appreciate everybody for attending, and thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see most of you again next week. Thanks. Feel free to reach out to any of us at ADAMA at any time.